What's up, everybody? Jeremy here. And guys, I'm very excited for the conversation that we're having today because, as you know, I've been talking a lot about how the global economy is changing. We've been talking about, things you need to know around finance, around how money is changing. We've been talking about central banking. Our guest today is Emmanuel Daniel. He is a global thought leader in the future of finance. He's an entrepreneur, writer, and listed as a top 10 global influencer in the fintech world. He's also the author of the book, The Great Transition, Personalization of Finance is here. Emmanuel, thank you so much for hanging out with me today.
Hey, Jeremy, how are you? I'm good. We are on opposite sides of the world, so good evening to you.
Yeah, it's wild, man. It's like it's 10:30 in the morning here. What time is it for you?
And it's 10:30 in the evening here. So
that's wild. Well, a good evening to you, sir.
Yeah.
So I want to hear first and foremost is, you're kind of looking at how finance is changing because we hear a lot of people talking about central bank digital currencies. We hear, how finance is changing, but we also see kind of the blockchain side of things and decentralization. I guess just to look at it, like, how have you been looking at finance over the years? Because there's a lot of trends and how things are changing, but where do you think we're actually headed?
Jeremy, I think that I've written the ultimate book. It's called The Great Transition, The Personalization of Finance is here. Now, the thing is that there's lots of moving parts in finance right now. You mentioned a few like central bank digital currency and so on, but it's a whole range of things that are happening, a lot of it driven by technology. And then there are also different actors in finance. So I started life building a business called the Asian Banker. My friends were all the traditional bankers. And then I started interacting with the new technology guys. Now, before the cryptocurrency guys came about, there was the digital banking guys, and they're still around. Okay, and then I superimposed what was actually happening in technology itself. And so in this book, what I'm saying is that technology itself is moving from its platform phase to its personalization phase. Moves into its personalization phase, finance is going to be central to that. And so I'm really excited about the transitions that are taking place, both in technology and in finance. And so that's what I've tried to sort of wrap the ideas around. And then somewhere towards the end of the book, I actually borrow an idea from researchers who have sort of mapped out how transitions occur. And then I figured out that society itself is moving from its tribal to its institutional, and then into its markets, and eventually into what everybody knows to be the networked world. We're not in the networked world. We are in transition from the markets world into the networked world. And that is why when you hear so much of the noise that in finance today, in the US, the regulators say some things, the treasury says another thing, and then the Bitcoin people and the cryptocurrency people are saying a whole set of different things. The Securities and Exchange Commission is saying, its own spiel in terms of what is a crypto asset, or is it a payment token, and all of that. So I spent many years developing the ideas that are in this book. And then I sort of have started placing where the ideas are coming from. So when you hear Warren Buffett say, or Charlie Munger say that, I don't believe in crypto, they still belong to the markets phase of the evolution of finance. They're totally right in what they're saying as long as they are in the markets phase. There are some rules in what assets are in the markets phase of the evolution of finance, and it's totally different when society eventually moves into the network phase. And the people who are in the network phase are still in the early days of how the network economy is evolving. And so sort of try to place where all these comments are coming from and where the transitions are taking place, and then to make sense of the transition as it occurs. Okay, so it's mapping the transitions in finance.
So let me ask you this then, because I'm sure if you asked, Christine Lagarde at the IMF, or you asked, Janet Yellen at the Treasury, they're looking at, either a European central currency, or here they're looking at, the Fed Now system. So they're looking at centralizing. But what you're telling me is we're actually heading towards decentralizing. So I guess the question is, number one, you mentioned all these different agencies, the Securities Exchange Commission, all saying different things. So I guess in some ways, is it the death throes of a system? And if so, why are we headed towards individualization and personalization versus centralization?
Okay, a lot of these ideas may sound like way over the heads of lots of people, right? So that's why the cover of my book has got a block of eyes on it, okay? And I start the book by making things as simple as possible by saying, hey, guys, remember the ice trade? No, you don't remember. There was a time when ice was actually sold out of the lakes of Boston and Michigan and then taken on carts right up to New York, where it finds its way into a gin and tonic or a lime juice, and, as far away as Havana. And today we mind-boggling to think that that's how we transported ice in the old days.
Sure.
And today what do we have? We have refrigeration. And what is the magic of refrigeration? It's CFC, the chlorofluorocarbon, the synthetic chemical that absorbs heat, right? So now finance is going through exactly that phase, those phases, okay? So it's going through a phase where, the money in your pocket goes through so many elements that is way beyond your control. Inflation, bank rates, exchange rates, trade and all that before it reaches you. And in many cases, money actually travels around the world literally before it gets to you. That's how inefficient money is. So what I'm saying is that money is on its way to becoming personalized. And personalized means we are actually heading towards those days where it is well within the control of the individual, how he wants to produce the money, who he wants to interact with, and so on. And actually, that sort of maps the transition of technology itself. Today we see platform players dominating technology. The whole idea is to put as many people on platforms, whether it's social media or trade flow platforms or whatever it is. But I think the individual is claiming back a lot of the control over the data that they produce, and they hand over the platforms. And so platforms have to start, thinking differently of the relationship move to the individual. And so that's the same thing that's happening today.
So let me ask you this then, because if you look at it, right, like economies many times are married to the strength of their own currency, right? Like if you look at, the US, we talk about the US being the reserve currency of the world, and like what happens if we're no longer the reserve currency. But I guess in this case, if it's personalizing, we're separating the economy from the actual buying power of the individual. So I guess what does that do to individual economies then, if we're kind of separating those two things?
Well, actually, the state and the institutions continue to try to figure out ways to absorb a lot of these transitions taking place. So they're not going to let it run. The state wants to, have its own power in that way.
Sure.
So what I've done for many, many years, and over my travel and seeing how finance works in different, societies, communities, things that work and things that don't work, payments in Africa, microcredit in Bangladesh, or, remittance in the Philippines, and so on. What I've tried to capture is the pulse of that transition as it evolves. So some things will work and some things will not work. I'm not saying that institutions will disappear, that individuals will have full control. No, that's not what's going to happen.
Right.
But institutions will need to evolve, and the service that they provide to customers and so on will need to evolve. So a bank, for example, today is in the intermediation business, which is the business of standing between a man and his money. The phase is coming through where if the man is able to have greater control about how he stores his money, uses it, how much of it is considered an asset rather than a payment tool, all of that then the institution needs to evolve and change its role in that interaction, right? So it may be more of a data provider and so on. So I've sort of imagined what the elements will look like as it evolves. I'm not really given direct answers, as it were,
Sure.
but something that happened after I completed the book, and now that it's published, it'll be out on September the 30th. Now, is that I myself have continued to develop ideas from them, and I hope that the people who read the book will say, I didn't see that, this is how it could evolve. For example, during the pandemic, something that became quite popular in a number of different pockets of communities is something called community currency, okay, where locked-in communities were able to recognize the value in work among the underemployed in that community, and then issue some kind of a token to recognize the value being created in a closed community. And this is in countries with perfectly functioning currencies, fiat currencies. Okay,
Sure.
And in fact, the regulator sort of thought, hey, is this in competition with fiat currency? No, it's not. It's actually recognizing value being created in communities. In fact, right through the pandemic, a number of magical, ecosystems evolved. In the Philippines, for example, entire families in villages were gaming all day to create value, and that was real money. They could go to the local wet market and buy their vegetable at the end of the day. So communities are responding in real ways. Now the question is, how much of that gets into the mainstream? How much of that gets into into real finance?
That's interesting too, because you talk about it getting into the mainstream, and I feel like so much of the mainstream, right, is owned by companies and institutions and banks and whatnot. That system changing is going to hurt them a lot, right? So how much do they actually want to talk about it right now until it happens, right?
Jeremy, the biggest pushback I've got on my ideas is in the US. And it's interesting because when you take something like payments, for example, at the end of the day, today, payments is nothing more than a message that is sent between point A and point B. Okay,
right.
And if you can send a WhatsApp message for free, you get payments for free. And guess where they are realizing that? That's in parts of Africa, for example. Now I go to the US. They tell me, we're happy with our credit cards. We're happy with our Venmo. We're happy with the structure, the multiple structured layers of payment infrastructure we have, even if it takes 3 days to clear a check or a credit card transaction is actually very expensive, like up to 3% of a transaction and so on, right? And that's because the institutions have a hold on the existing, right? Then
they're dinosaurs that kind of are very hard to move, right? They're very stuck in their space and they're big.
Yeah, and I spend a lot of time thinking about, so at which point will the US make breakthroughs in transitions? Now, the US is dominated by existing institutions. They are very powerful, they are well funded and so on. But they do make that transition eventually. And when they do, they make it very quickly. I mean, the mobile device, for example, is an amazing transition where the US was a laggard, compared to Japan and many other countries. But when it all came together today, you've got the iPhone, right? So which leads the rest of the world. So I think that we have to combine or mix ideas from institutional development, how institutions develop, businesses develop, and technology and society itself. So society as well, right? So I've sort of created a sense of an organic mix of ideas, and then threw in some of the best practices that have evolved over time, like things that work today. Mm-hmm. The DNA of finance. What is finance? It's not really about technology, more about the balance sheet and about the community. very clear in my book, okay, because where finance has been stable and functional and effective to the local community, it has a community element in there. And I say many things in there that throws a lot of ideas that people on.
So I think one of the things that's really interesting to me is, I think at the same time, like how finance is changing. I don't know if we're ever going to see something like a world war as we've seen it in the past. I think, frankly, we're going to see a lot of it waged through business and through finance and things like that. And I guess, how do you kind of see finance as being kind of part of the future battleground of what we're going to see?
Oh my goodness, if these questions, as I was writing the book, the answers started staring at me in the face. Okay, so think about something like the reserve currency, the US dollar as a reserve currency. So as I was writing the book, I researched it and I said, something, the dollar became the reserve currency not because the US had an intention for it to be a global reserve currency. In fact, the US couldn't care less what happened to the dollar outside of and the evolution of the dollar itself, the way from the Bretton Woods Agreement and so on, was because the U.S. made it very difficult to hold the peg to go. So a lot of the decisions made were knee-jerk, were very situational and so on. There was not part of an overall trend. Then you apply that to something like what would the next reserve currency be? And which country will dominate, for example. And then I came to the conclusion that it's actually the dysfunctional countries that shape the future of finance. Okay, and I say in a broad way, to the extent that the US continues to create more debt and then digitize that debt, it can continue to extend the role of the dollar as a global currency for a long time to come.
Sure. As well as a lot of the aid packages they kind of offer to other countries, because then, like, well, if you're spreading the currency has to be spent.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is that when the debt is created, it's externalized, and you hope that it doesn't come back. Okay, so then it becomes global as a result. So that's the kind of thing. Those are the kinds of things that shape the development of global finance. Okay, it's not intention. Sometimes it's it's incidences. It's the collection of debt. Now, the big thing about the dollar right now is that the U.S. has now extended its debt to beyond its GDP. So total 27 trillion, GDP 20 trillion. So the ability to meet the obligation is now a moot point. Debt has become the economy. So with thoughts like that, and then on top of that, because of the Russian-Ukraine war, we start seeing factions forming in the global financial order. So and there will be pushback, both between the U.S. and the rest of the world, as well as within the rest of the world. So, without saying too much, what I'm trying to say here is that that the evolution of finance, sometimes it's not because of intention or specific conscious public policy. In fact, public policy follows the evolution. So I have a lot to say in terms of what the next global crisis is going to look like. Just by taking a look at where we've been and how it's evolving right now, and so on. But one other point here is this: that we are entering a global economy that's increasingly digitized and also increasingly divorced from any underlying asset. Okay, so in 2008, the global crisis and the U.S. banking crisis was all about derivatives, which are two-step removed from the underlying asset, right? So we've now extended that even further. They are even more esoteric than they were before. So the financialization of everything, sort of shapes the future of finance going forward. So this, so if you just look at trends taking place right now, today, you can sort of project what the next 10 years is going to look like.
It's really interesting, and I guess looking at kind of the as you mentioned, the kind of factions that are developing too, even around finance, even with the war in Europe at the moment as well. Because I know Hungary recently just reinvested in Gazprom because they said, hey, we can't continue to punish ourselves. And you look at the value of the ruble has actually went back up from all these different financial restrictions that have been put on Russia at the same time. So it is really interesting how it seems in some ways that the old way of doing that just doesn't work anymore. So I think we are kind of being forced into something new economically.
Yeah. In fact, the secret story there is an organization called the Bank for International Settlements. Okay.
It's in Basel. In Basel, yeah.
Right. And, right up to right now, all of the major countries of the world, China, Russia, the US to a large extent, Canada and so on, they meet every year in Basel and they love each other. The regulators, the central bankers, they love each other. They love, meeting the standards that they've set for themselves and so on. So it's a very collegiate, atmosphere. It's a very collegiate, decision-making community. And then the reason why central bank digital currencies have become globally talked about is because of the BIS, okay, because of the things that they have. They fall over themselves to, to show how they love each other, okay, as a community. And then I'm looking at it and saying, at which point will the fracture, take place? At which point will the Chinese say, you know what, we're going to have some standards that are going to be unique to us? The Americans already say that to some extent right now, but there will be more of that. Then when that happens, whether there will be blocks, there are already trade blocks, but there's no currency blocks in a way. The dollar is still the dominant, underlining currency globally. So we take those points into account. Now, the interesting thing is that precisely because of the blocks and precisely because of vested interests, you have the underlining development of cryptocurrencies, benefiting from all these fractures in the global community. So I'll just leave it as that because,
sure.
If I say that, the future is crypto, just because it is, I think people don't really get the argument because what's really happening is that the more countries care and develop blocks, the more they set the stage for a universal currency to come about.
And that's interesting too, because you look at something developing like BRICS, right? You have other blocks that are developing, just like you're talking about, and a lot of them are trade based. But I don't think we're that far from a currency base, as you mentioned. So,
then we have to look at the elements that make global currency. Okay, one of the major elements in there is global liquidity, meaning that when people want that money, that currency, they need to be able to find it. And the only thing globally operational that way is the dollar, and all of the other players don't want to expose too much of their currencies into the global market for precisely that reason, because they don't want it to be shorter. They want to have greater control over themselves. So you can't say that I want greater control over my currency and I want it to be a global reserve currency in the same breath. You just can't do that.
Right. So you have to give up one in order to get the other.
You need to.
Yeah. So let me ask you this then. I guess based on that, do you think we're kind of hitting like the swan song of central banking? Like, do you think that is going to be a thing of the past, or what are your thoughts on that?
So, in the 1980s, when Basel I was, hit the fan, which was, banking crisis, was the community banks and so on. And then it was the international global trading banks and so on. Nobody has stopped to say, hey, wait a minute, do we need to look at the central banks? They as responsible as we make them out to be. Since the 1900s, a lot of the U.S. media has praised the central bankers up to the heavens. They make them look superstars, that you can't do any wrong. And today, central banks are like a fourth pillar. They, next to the legislature, the judiciary, and the executive, this is almost like the fourth pillar of government. We're and yet allowed to make its own decisions. So I do think that we are coming to a point where we need a review of central banks.
That's really interesting. And I guess one of the things that we're kind of I guess it's more the U.S. conservatives that push this than anything else is kind of, will China overtake the U.S. in terms of currency? I guess what are your thoughts on that? Like, is that something we should be worried about? Shouldn't be worried about? Like, what is your thoughts about the economics there?
The thing about China is that it likes the prestige of having its currency, as a global reserve currency. It likes the prestige of that, but it can't stomach the risks that come with it. Okay, so for right now, as long as there is no current and capital account trading of Chinese renminbi outside of China, that question itself is a moot question. I know that lots of newspapers, media around the world loves, discussing this. As long as there's no convertibility, it's not happening. Okay, period. Now, the second thing is that there is not enough renminbi outside of China. Even in the Belt and Road initiatives, all of the Chinese construction companies, the companies that do projects overseas, they want to be paid in dollars, so that they benefits from bringing dollars back into the economy. They don't get any benefit. They get punished for bringing renminbi back into the economy. The only reason why the cost of some of these projects are still denominated in renminbi is because both the supplier and the developer are in China. So the Chinese bank pays the Chinese developer in China. So it stays in China, but the beneficiary of the projects are all outside of China. So Sri Lanka and Djibouti and so on have to pay in dollars. Okay, so the Sri Lankan governor told me right there at his desk that the Chinese gave us $30 billion in swap facility. We didn't have to use it. We couldn't use it because the Chinese contractors want to be paid in dollars. Okay, so that's the reality. So when I see all these conversations taking place, I look for, where the rubber hits the road, like, what's the actual experience on the ground. Now, and then on top of that, the whole idea of other countries holding any country's assets, so it's dollar or the renminbi or the euro, is that when an investor holds these assets in that current country's currency, it's almost like that country is working for the rest of the world. Actually, the ways the US works for the rest of the world. Okay, all of the countries that have US dollar assets, it's because those assets are productive. They are profitable. Right now, so if any country that wants its currency to be a reserve currency of the rest of the world is saying to the rest of the world that we will generate this debt, we will sell it to you, you will hold it for us, and we will work our ass off to pay that debt. Okay. Now, until that culture comes into play, that ain't happening. Okay. I'm trying to speak.
Well, I will say there's not many countries or individuals working their asses off to pay off debt. They're usually just trying to find more.
Point where it needs to replace equity with debt, as a source of capital. It's now entering that. Okay,
that's what modern monetary theory does. Modern monetary theory replaces capital with debt. Right, we're trading debt.
And so, there will be reason to buy Chinese debt in the future. So these are the elements that we look at: liquidity, assets, and convertibility. Once you see things in action, then you say, okay, this currency is on the rise. So in that way, there is no alternative to the dollar just now. But interestingly, the dollar is also being extended because the more stable coins that are being issued around the world, that's an extension of the dollar. Okay. And the OCC in the US is taking responsibility by having stable coins, having them legislated as deposit-taking institutions, but they can operate anywhere in the world. So this extends the life of the US dollar as a global currency. Okay, that's how I see. And as long as the moving parts are moving at the pace that they are right now, I'd say the dollar still dominates. And any other currency that wants to, play a greater role has to not care, be very liquid globally, have assets that the rest of the world will buy.
Very cool. Well, Emmanuel Daniel, the book once again is The Great Transition, Personalization of Finance is here. Where can we find you? Where can we find the book?
Oh, visit. Well, I made it easy for everyone. Okay, so just visit my blog page, which is emmanueldaniel.com. And everything is in there. So from there, it will lead you to Amazon and everything. All the other sites where you can get the book out of.
Very cool. Well, Emmanuel Daniel, thank you so much for hanging out with me today.
Hey, thank you so much, Jeremy. And have a great day.
You as well.